like subtitled movies, you feel like you're a smarter person.
That he was about 6 feet tall, that he was completely scourged all over his body, he was crucified.
The Passion of the Christ was never just a movie. It was a mirror, and when people looked into it, they saw something they didn't want to see. Hollywood hated it, the church feared it, and Mel Gibson paid the price. But the real question is, why? Before the cameras even rolled, the walls started closing in. Studio doors slammed shut. Investors pulled out. Agents whispered, "Don't touch it." To Hollywood, this wasn't just another biblical story, it was radioactive. A film about Jesus, spoken entirely in ancient languages, directed by a man who wouldn't compromise? That sounded like madness. But Gibson wasn't chasing fame or controversy. He said the story chose him, that every time he opened scripture, he saw a version of love and suffering that no film had ever dared to show. Raw, human, and divine all at once. It wasn't about profit. It was about redemption. Still, when you move against the system pushes back. Journalists mocked it. Industry insiders warned it would divide people. Some even said it was anti-everything, anti-Hollywood, anti-progress, anti-sanity. But maybe the real fear wasn't about the film itself. Maybe it was about what it would reveal about us. And that's when the resistance began, not just from the media, but from places no one expected. Hollywood has a strange way of reacting to faith. They'll embrace anything, violence, lust, war, greed, as long as it sells. But bring up faith, especially one that confronts guilt, suffering, and redemption, suddenly everyone gets nervous. That's what Mel Gibson walked into. The town that once gave him Oscars now treated him like a leper. Meetings turned cold. Doors closed mid-sentence. He'd pitch the idea and get that look, the one that says, "Are you serious?" They didn't want blood. They didn't want pain. They didn't want the cross. What they didn't understand was that Gibson wasn't trying to please them. He was obsessed, almost haunted, by the image of Christ's suffering. He said it was like an open wound that wouldn't heal until he showed it to the world. But every time he tried to move forward, there was another wall. Politics, accusations, endless PR traps. Some called him fanatical. Others whispered darker things, that he was part of some agenda, that he wanted to weaponize religion. Yet all he wanted was to show truth, not the sanitized version, but the brutal honesty of what love costs. And here's where it gets interesting. The louder the resistance became, the more unstoppable the project seemed to get. It's as if the pushback was feeding the fire. Now, here's where things turn strange. You'd expect the church, of all places, to stand behind a film about Christ's sacrifice. But instead, Mel found hesitation, even fear. Some bishops privately loved it. They said it was powerful, holy, necessary. But publicly, silence. No endorsements, no official blessing. Just quiet distance, the kind that speaks louder than words. See, by the early 2000s, the church was deep in scandal. Lawsuits, corruption, cover-ups. The very institution built on truth was drowning in secrets. So when Mel Gibson came along with a story that tore open the reality of sin and redemption, some leaders saw danger. Because if people started feeling the weight of the cross again, if they started questioning who really represented Christ, the institution itself could shake. And maybe that's what frightened them most. Not the blood, not the brutality, but the mirror it held up. Some priests quietly warned him, "You're going to make enemies in high places." Others said, "The church doesn't want a reminder of suffering right now." But Mel didn't stop. He said, if the church is afraid of the cross, then it's already lost its soul. And that was the line that drew the divide.
When the trailers dropped, the world split in two. To some, The Passion of the Christ was the most powerful depiction of Jesus ever filmed. To others, it was dangerous, even hateful, and the media pounced on that divide like wolves. Headlines didn't talk about the film's message, they talked about Mel, his past, his faith, his politics. They dragged everything into the spotlight, twisting the story from a man making a film about Jesus to a radical trying to ignite religious conflict. Night after night, TV panels argued over whether it was anti-Semitic, too violent, too political, anything but spiritual. But the strange thing, the controversy only drew more people in. Curiosity turned into pilgrimage. People packed theaters, crying, praying, shaking. Gibson once said he could feel the spiritual tension everywhere he went, that something unseen was trying to choke the project before it could speak. "It's like I'm carrying a cross of my own," he said. "Every headline is a lash, every insult a nail." But you could tell he almost welcomed it, as if the suffering proved the story's worth. Still, something darker was brewing, because as the film broke records, a new kind of backlash emerged, not from critics, but from power, people who didn't want the message spreading too far. This is the part most people never hear about, the invisible war behind the cameras. While the media screamed on the outside, strange things started happening inside the production. Equipment failed for no reason. Cameras broke mid-scene. Schedules collapsed overnight. Even the actors felt it, that heaviness, that sense that something didn't want this movie made. Gibson later said he believed it was spiritual warfare, that what they were filming wasn't just art, but a declaration. "We were making something the enemy didn't want to exist," he said. The lead actor, Jim Caviezel, was struck by lightning twice during shooting. The director of photography nearly collapsed from exhaustion. People fainted on set during the crucifixion scenes. It was as if every drop of pain being reenacted on screen was echoing through real life. But instead of stopping, Gibson leaned harder into it. He'd pray before every take, carry his rosary in one hand, and shout, "Let's go again," when everyone else wanted to quit. It wasn't ego driving him anymore. It was conviction, that unseen, burning conviction that this film was meant to shake souls. Still, when you fight something spiritual, it doesn't always fight back in the open. It moves quietly, through influence, money, and power. When The Passion of the Christ finally hit theaters, the numbers were staggering. Hundreds of millions worldwide, crowds in tears, people confessing, returning to faith. It wasn't just a movie anymore, it had become a movement. And that's exactly what terrified the institutions. The church had lost control of the narrative. Hollywood had failed to bury it. Suddenly, ordinary people were having their own encounters, weeping in theaters, reconciling, praying again. You can't regulate that kind of awakening. You can't profit from it. That's when the real pushback began, not with words, but with silence. Bishops distanced themselves. Vatican officials called it too violent. The same moral gatekeepers who'd ignored corruption suddenly became sensitive about realism. But Mel saw through it. When institutions lose their soul, they start fearing anyone who reminds them of it. It wasn't paranoia. There were whispers of quiet bans, parishes told not to show it, schools discouraged from discussing it. Even some Catholic media avoided it, as if pretending it didn't exist would make it go away. Yet the people kept watching, kept talking, kept feeling something that official religion couldn't contain. And that's when Mel realized this was never just resistance to a film. It was resistance to awakening, the kind that threatens comfort, control, and hierarchy. Mel Gibson once said, "You can't serve two masters, God and the system." By the time The Passion had run its course, he knew exactly what that meant. The film had done what it was meant to do, awaken something raw, something ancient in people. But it also pulled back the curtain on something rotten, the moral decay inside the very church that claimed to represent Christ. Reports of abuse scandals were surfacing everywhere. Money trails, cover-ups, bishops protecting predators. The same church leaders who criticize his film for being too violent were hiding crimes that made violence look tame. And Mel watched it all unfold with disgust and heartbreak. He started speaking out, cautiously at first, then openly. He said, "The corruption is deep. It's not just sin, it's a system built to protect itself." That's when his relationship with the Catholic hierarchy fractured completely. Some called him disloyal, others branded him paranoid. But for Mel, it wasn't rebellion, it was grief.
He still loved the faith, the prayers, the mystery, the sacrifice, but he couldn't stomach what it had become. It's hard to imagine, but the same man who gave the world one of the most spiritual films ever made was now being pushed to the margins of the very faith that inspired it. Mel Gibson says he's not done. The next project, The Resurrection, isn't just a sequel. It's a spiritual investigation, a film about the battle between light and darkness, good and evil, not in some ancient past, but in the world right now. He wants to explore the resurrection not as a Sunday school story, but as a cosmic event, something that rippled through time, tearing open the veil between heaven and earth. Why us, he asks. Why is humanity so important in that fight? It's the same question that drove the Passion and the same one that made him an enemy of the comfortable. The deeper he goes, the more resistance he faces, not just from Hollywood, but from the very forces he believes are trying to keep truth buried. For Gibson, art isn't entertainment anymore, it's warfare. Every frame is a confession, every line of dialogue a prayer or a warning. And that's what makes his story so haunting. Because when he talks about corruption in the church, he's not just talking about priests and politics, he's talking about a world that's forgotten what sacrifice means. So maybe The Passion wasn't the end of Mel Gibson's battle, maybe it was only the beginning.